Don't believe everything you read on the internet. Don't believe everything you read on Twitter. Even when the Twitter stuff that you read was fake and turns out to be real. Yeah, we're talking about the Bitcoin ETFs that were approved by the SEC's Twitter account that was actually a post by hackers, which then turned out to be true the next day by the SEC's own admission. So, interesting enough, we'll talk about it. And apparently North Korea has stolen a lot of crypto, and there's a new botnet that's also mining crypto. We'll talk about that in this episode. Today, we're facing an unprecedented array of data breaches, hacking attempts, and surges in digital crime. Why is there such a widespread amount, and how little is noticed in our everyday lives? Malware, dark sites, brute forcing, zero-day script kiddies, and nation-state hackers are all on the rise. Learn more about the threats we face and gain a bit more knowledge than yesterday. Hey everyone, another episode of Exploit Brokers is coming to you now. So the SEC was hacked, and in a post by malwarebytes.com, they actually go over it, where the title is SEC X account hacked to hawk crypto scams. What kind of crypto scams? Well, the crypto scams that can make hackers a lot of money. In the article, there's even an image that was a snapshot of the tweet that, is it still called tweet? Yeah, over the tweet that was given by the hacked SEC account, and it reads, "Today the SEC grants approval for hashtag Bitcoin," with an emoji, ETFs for listing on all registered national securities exchanges. The approved Bitcoin ETFs will be subject to ongoing surveillance and compliance measures to ensure continued investor protection. So, at the time this was posted, this was actually posted by a hacker who had taken over the account, and it was actually removed within 30 minutes, according to the Malwarebytes article. Now later, the SEC actually came out the next day to say that they did approve it. We'll touch on that momentarily. But the fake tweet was up long enough to cause a $2,000 spike in Bitcoin exchange rates. So the speculation, what the article is kind of speculating, and my speculation on this, is you had a hacker or hacker group or cybercrime syndicate, however you want to call it, who already had some kind of knowledge that they're going to do this. I mean, they're the ones committing the hack, right? So they have to know. And they probably dumped a large amount of money into Bitcoin, right? Or you could even have a nation state hacker do it, honestly, because they would have a very large incentive to pretty much pump and dump it, right? They can make a quick buck or lots of bucks. And what they did was essentially that. At least that's what it looks like. Now, the interesting part is in the Malwarebytes article, it states, according to X, an unidentified individual was able to obtain control over a phone number associated with the @SEC.gov account through a third party. This would suggest the compromise was a result of a SIM swapping attack, where an attacker takes control of a phone number by convincing a mobile carrier to transfer the victim's phone number to a SIM card they own. For those who have listened to some of my other episodes, a SIM swap attack is actually one of the very common ways to pretty much do an account takeover that's more on the social engineering side. And what happens is the victim themselves don't have to necessarily be involved. In fact, a lot of the time they're not. You'll have a hacker or social engineer will call up the mobile carrier's website, or will call up the mobile carrier, and they'll pretend to be the victim. They'll say, "Hey, I'm John Doe." And they generally might even have enough information to back that up. And then once they do, they'll convince the carrier, "Hey, I lost my phone, I need a new SIM card." And sometimes you can probably do an eSIM now, which just makes this attack a little bit faster. But essentially they would get a SIM card, and the SIM card would go on a phone they control. The phone number would be taken out of control of the legitimate party and over to the hacker. And from there, they can essentially get two-factor authentication codes. They can prove that they are, who they say they are, quote unquote, and do password resets in other ways. And this is what it looks like might have happened. Funnily enough, according to Malwarebytes, the SEC did not have two-factor enabled on the X account. Funny enough. Because if they did, unless you're a premium member on X or Twitter, I believe that the authentication goes by a QR code that you scan onto an authentication app. So if they would have done that, this would have been a lot harder to actually perpetrate. Lesson learned, right? So because of that, the SEC's account tweeted out the crypto thing, which then allowed hackers, to essentially pump and dump Bitcoin, make a $2,000 profit off the top, more or less. It was a $2,000 spike. You have to assume they sold at the top. But, a lot of things play into that. And that's kind of the gist of it. Funny enough, although that was committed on one day, the following day, the SEC actually did approve Bitcoin for ETFs. In an article by Engadget, it states, the Securities and Exchange Commission has approved the application of 11 spot Bitcoin ETFs in a highly anticipated decision that will make it much easier for people to dabble in cryptocurrency investing without directly buying and holding Bitcoin. This essentially it's the SEC saying, hey, you can buy crypto through a fund, through a publicly exchanged fund. And once you start going to finance, I don't touch on that much. I'm more of the technical aspect, but it's interesting enough. And any of you who are out there who are wanting to get into Bitcoin without getting into Bitcoin, maybe this is something you can look up. Interesting enough, the SEC does say they are not endorsing or approve Bitcoin. This is just something they're approving for investors to be able to put their money in. But just like anything else, anything you put in the stock market is a risk, right? So that is the SEC and the Bitcoin ETF debacle. Still touching on crypto, let's move on to threat actors or hackers associated with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, such as Lazarus. Now, I don't know if the Lazarus APT was actually responsible for this, but they're one of the ones that I most know with North Korea. But anyways, so threat actors affiliated with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, also known as North Korea, have plundered at least $600 million in cryptocurrency in 2023. The DPRK was responsible for almost a third of all funds stolen in crypto attacks last year, despite a 30% reduction from the US $850 million haul in 2022. So what this is saying is that North Korea hackers have stolen at least $600 million in crypto in 2023. And they do this in a variety of ways, and there's some cool technical details I'll touch about momentarily. But even though there was a 30% reduction from 2022, North Korea was still responsible for almost a third of all crypto stolen in 2023. So to put that into perspective, right? You have probably a couple of hacking groups sponsored and backed by North Korea, that are operating as a cyber war branch. This is a main way, or one of the main ways that I'm aware that North Korea tries to get some revenue, right? They're operating like a crime syndicate because they're already sanctioned heavily by several countries. It goes on to say that there's even, and I quote, there are indications that additional breaches targeting the crypto sector towards the end of 2023 could push this figure higher to around 700 million. 700 million stolen. Now, you're talking about the fact that North Korea state-sponsored hackers have pretty much stolen about 3 billion since 2017, and that's just an astronomical number if you consider just the amount of Bitcoin that's in circulation. Or sorry, not Bitcoin, crypto. Now, on to some of the technical details of this, which is interesting. They are then swapped mostly for USDT or Tron and converted to hard currency using high volume OTC, I believe that's over-the-counter, brokers. So what's even interesting about this is you have North Korea also trying to do stuff the way criminals were doing. There's this part of the article that's very interesting. The company further noted that the DPRK hackers continued to explore other money laundering tools after the US Treasury Department sanctioned a crypto mixer known as Sinbad for processing a chunk of their proceeds, indicating constant evolution despite law enforcement pressures. With nearly 1.5 billion in the past 2 years alone, North Korea's hacking prowess demands continuous vigilance and innovation from business and governments. So, if we put this into perspective, right? The North Korean hackers are using criminal style tactics, right? They'll use any method to try to steal crypto, whether that's compromise private keys, wallets, seed phrases, hacks, malware, whatever mechanism they can use to steal crypto. Then they'll launder it to quote unquote make it clean, or to put it into their wallet without arising suspicion. And you've even have services like Sinbad who was a crypto mixer, and they took heat because they pretty much processed a lot of the funds, or a lot of funds, not necessarily all of the funds, but a lot of funds for North Korea. Whether they were aware of it or not, I mean, that I don't know, at least not at this time. But that is very much sounding like criminal enterprise level actions, right? It's interesting. It definitely is interesting. So let's move on to our last story, NoaBot. But in an article by the Hacker News, NoaBot, latest Mirai-based botnet targeting SSH servers for crypto mining. So, for those who have been around the channel for a couple of episodes or have looked through some of the other episodes, Mirai has come up a handful of times. Mirai is a botnet that comes up quite often on this channel. Botnets are just kind of one of those interesting topics that pop up a lot, honestly. And the first sentence of the article says, a new Mirai-based botnet called NoaBot is being used by threat actors as part of a crypto mining campaign since the beginning of 2023. I know we're pretty early into 2023 and there's already massive campaigns, but I mean, hey, no rest for the wicked, right? The capabilities of the new botnet NoaBot includes a wormable self-spreader and an SSH key backdoor to download and execute additional binaries or spread itself to new victims. Now, that little section right there, the wormable self-spreader, for those who are aware and for those who are not, a worm is any kind of malware that can propagate without user interactions. They're pretty severe because if you have a wide enough spread bug that allows a worm to spread, you have stuff like WannaCry and a couple of other recently known malware and just other malware that can spread like wildfire. Because this is not you click something and your computer gets encrypted or something gets installed. This is not they find a way to pivot into your server and then they take advantage of some bug that lets you do remote code execution. A worm can do remote code execution most of the time, but a worm is something that allows takeover of the machine without any interaction. It's one of the most powerful bugs to exploit, because once you have a worm, you have something that can pretty much just keep burrowing and spread itself, and that becomes very dangerous very quick because it could just keep spreading. It's kind of hard to stop. Now, the article goes on to say, Mirai, which had its source code leaked in 2016, has been the progenitor of a number of botnets, the most recent being Infected Slurs, which is capable of mounting a distributed denial of service attack, which essentially means they get all the botnets to hit one computer and overload it. And there are indications that the NoaBot could be linked to another botnet campaign involving a Rust-based malware family known as P2P Infect, which has recently received an update to target routers and IoT devices. So, I know some of you may be wondering, well, what's the significance of Rust-based malware? Why is that being highlighted in the article? Well, you have variants of Golang-based and Rust-based malware that are harder to detect. A lot of malware has traditionally been written in Visual Basic, C, things like that. And those are very well known, documented, and the behavior can be extrapolated. You always have some fresh malware that none of the antivirus or there's no record of it, right? But Golang and Rust are just so new and so different language-wise than what's been seen before. They're hard to detect, at least at this point in time, what I know. And the fact that they're also targeting routers and IoT makes them even more susceptible, especially with the fact that, how many people update their IoT devices? If you find a bug in a camera or some other IoT device that was sent out 3 years ago, no one's going to update it. And unless it's being actively connected to the internet to some managed service, like if you just put a camera outside your house and that's it, that's it. Unless there's some mechanism for you to update and you're tech savvy and you update it and you maintain. Most people barely update their computers because it's a very tedious chore that not everyone likes or has the capability to, right? That's just what it is. Should we take steps to make sure we do update our devices? Of course. But I mean, even light bulbs are connected IoT devices now. Are we really gonna take the time to update our light bulbs? We should, but will we? I don't think so. A lot of us won't. Now, this goes on even further to say that despite NoaBot's Mirai foundations, its spreader module leverages an SSH scanner to search for servers susceptible to dictionary attack in order to brute force them and add an SSH public key in the authorized key files for remote access. Let's break that down. An SSH brute forcer is an application or an attack that essentially means you're trying to guess login information, but for SSH. Kind of like how you've heard of credential stuffing and stuff like that for websites. SSH, you can log in via username and password. You can log in via keys and things of that nature. So an SSH scanner will try to go in and brute force its way in using username and password. And then they'll set up a key. And once they set up that key, even if you change the password of the user, a public key means that you've essentially gotten a backdoor. You'd have to know to go and look into the authorized key files and remove the authorized key files. And that's assuming they don't have some other piece of malware downloaded to keep re-adding it in, right? But for now, for what this is saying, they're brute forcing and adding a public key. It's interesting to know that they're not doing Bitcoin, they're not doing Ethereum, they're specifically deploying an XM rig coin miner. And they're using this to try to just get as much money as possible. So one last technical detail about the NoaBot that I found kind of interesting is a lot of botnets, a lot of mining botnets will hold the wallet. And they hold the wallet because, I mean, it's easier to just write it that way, right? There's less weird things they have to do, less sophisticated techniques they have to employ. If they put in the wallet, then as soon as it begins mining, there's already an endpoint or an end goal for that money to go to, the wallet. And this NoaBot is not using that. The miner obfuscates its configuration and also uses a custom mining pool to avoid exposing the wallet address used by the miner. Kupichk, I am butchering that, I apologize. Kupichk said, highlighting some level of preparedness of the threat actors. And this is something that I'm seeing more and more. A lot of articles talk about it. A lot of security researchers keep mentioning it. There's so much more sophisticated malware techniques that are being employed to prevent security researchers, to prevent the operations from getting exposed. And it's just so fascinating from a technical standpoint. Granted, these are still criminals and black hats that are doing crimes, right? They're committing crimes, they're doing bad stuff, they're taking money or resources from people, and it's bad. But from a technical standpoint, it's just very interesting to see the level of sophistication that's being put into this malware, the way that a lot of these are operating like businesses, right? It is criminal enterprises, whether that's a single hacker who's selling malware as a service or botnet operators that are updating their fleet of bots with some very sophisticated techniques. It's a very rapidly changing environment for hackers, people, and everyone. So it's definitely something to keep an eye out. It's always good to monitor your computers, monitor your stuff, try to have a good sense of cybersecurity awareness. But as always, the level of sophistication keeps going up. It's a cat and mouse game. Guys, this has been Lauda with Exploit Brokers. I thank you. Please, if you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe and like. If you're on a podcast, please follow, like, and subscribe. Rate us if you can. We thank you for listening to us, and we'll see you in the next episode.